So hey boys, I wanted to go over osmosis with you guys, all right? You hear the word osmosis, I know some of y'all are thinking of Osmosis Jones and whatnot. No, that ain't what it is, all right? So let's run through it. Let's kind of go through some vocab, all right? There is a cell, all right? We're going to put a few solutes in that cell. So each little dot represents a solute. A solute could be a sugar, salt, organelle, whatever, okay? Typically when we discuss osmosis and we use the word solute, we are thinking of salt, okay? And that's kind of the typical way of interpreting it, but again, it could be open to sugars and other things as well. All right, so this cell has I put 3 solutes just for simplicity. And we're gonna take this cell and throw it into an area that is very, very, very salty. Some kind of, salt water. Okay, keeping it simple, salt water, right? So we have an external environment that is very, very salty, and then a cell that doesn't have the same concentration. So let's use some vocab. The cell is hypotonic to the environment. Hypo means not as many, and tonic means salt, solutes. So literally the word means not as many solutes as the external environment. And that environment, I'll just put water for short, okay? The water is going to be hypertonic. Hyper means more, like if you said someone is hyperactive, for example, hyper, more of, okay? So I'm gonna say the same thing in two different sentences, if you will. You can say the cell is hypotonic to the water, or you could say the water is hypertonic to the cell. I used 2 different words, but I said the same exact thing, okay? Now what we know about passive transport is that this cell wants to reach equilibrium. That means that we need to have the same salt concentration or salt to water ratio inside the cell as we do outside. So how is it going to do that? And one of the things that some of y'all would guess is, oh, it's going to take in more salt, right? That's what somebody would guess. But I'm going to tell you, that's not what the definition of osmosis is. The definition of osmosis, just to remind you, is that it is the movement or diffusion of water. So now let's look at that again. How is this cell going to reach equilibrium? It's going to lose water. So in essence, what you have, that's like before and after. Let's label it like that, okay? Before and after. So in essence, what's going to happen is the cell loses water. That's what my arrow represents. So now the concentration, and that's the important part of this understanding, is the concentration is the same. The same salt to water ratio inside the cell exists as it does outside the cell. And at this point you could say the cell is isotonic to the water. Okay? The cell is isotonic to the water, or the water is isotonic to the cell, and that's the exact same thing as saying the cell has reached equilibrium with the environment. So equilibrium and isotonic mean the same thing, okay? Let's do another example. Now, let's have a cell that's good and salty. Okay? And we're going to put this cell in an area that doesn't have many salts. So we could say the cell is hypertonic to the environment, or the environment is what? Hypotonic to the cell. So how is this cell going to reach equilibrium? Okay, again, some of y'all are going to say, oh, can't this cell just kick out some salts? Well, that's not what osmosis is. It has to take in more water. So drawing arrows here is a very important thing because it enables you to kind of visualize what's going on. So this cell takes in more water. So yeah, it's going to get bigger. And it takes in enough water so that it reaches, what was that word? Equilibrium. Or now the cell is isotonic to the environment. Okay, question for you. What happens if the salt to water ratio is just too great and it has to keep taking in more and more and more water? At some point, the cell will explode. And when the cell explodes, that's my dumb word. When the cell explodes, you would say in biology, the cell has lysed. Okay? The cell lyses or lysed, right? That is why when someone goes to the hospital and their doctor gives them an IV, they don't give you pure water. Pure water would cause some of those cells to lyse. And that becomes toxic. Instead, they give you a 2% saline solution to keep that solution in equilibrium with the cells. So lastly, I'm bringing that paper here. Lastly, let's look at this. Here's a snail, all right? Yeah, I'm an artist, yo, look at that. When you kids were growing up, I know there were some of you sickos out there that poured salt on the snails. Let's imagine what's going on. You're pouring salt all over this guy, right? So yeah, we can visualize that poorly drawn snail, but let's take it a step further. There is a snail's little slimy cell, and he's got a couple of solutes or salts within those cells. But what are we doing? We're pouring salt on there, right? So what's going to happen? When you were kids growing up, you poured salt on that snail, and he was fizzing and oozing, and liquids were pouring out of him. Yeah, that's right, because the poor dying dude was trying to reach equilibrium. That's how you killed the snail. You poured salt on him until his cells reached equilibrium to the point where he just dried up, all right? And that's all I got for you boys. There's more to cover, but I'll do that in the presentations. Peace out.